Impact of climate change on human development in Yemen. Climate change is a global challenge, and its effects are felt disproportionately by most of the vulnerable countries. Yemen is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. As well, it is one of the least ready to adapt. The report we are launching today is developed by UNDP in coordination with Pardee Center for International Studies at the University of Denver, as well as Appalachian State University. We're going to hear some opening statement by Dr. Abdullah Dardari, UNDP's Secretary General and Director of Regional Bureau for Arab States. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Abdullah Dardari.
Good afternoon. My colleagues insist on putting me in trouble. I am not the Secretary General, of course. I am just a mere Assistant Secretary General of the UN. So it's very important to minute that statement. Thank you very much for being with us today. This is a very important report. Just to give you 2 or 3 numbers why this is important, because the report will be presented and we will be discussing it. So we estimate that economic growth will slow down because of climate. In Yemen, we can expect to see 8.1 million additional people joining the poverty lines by 2016. Should we continue with the current economic structure, which is a non-sustainable growth model, we are dealing with in Yemen, not only in Yemen, the whole Arab region, and I'm responsible for in the UNDP. We have this problem and challenge of unsustainable growth models that where actually environmental degradation and climate change eat up most of the growth. So in Yemen, we predict to have actually a loss of $93 billion of GDP by 2060, should we continue with the current climate situation and the current mismanagement and misgovernance of the natural resources of the country. Even food security, of course, is a huge concern. We believe that 3.8 million people will suffer, additional 3.8 million people will suffer from malnutrition as a result. The Prime Minister is here. أهلا دولة الرئيس. So please allow me to welcome His Excellency the Prime Minister and his joining delegation. It's such a great pleasure and a great honor. تشرفنا يا سيدي. شكرا لتشريفكم. أهلا وسهلا. And this is I will recap if you don't mind. So it's a great honor to join with His Excellency the Prime Minister and the ministerial delegation with him to say that launching this report is a very important event for us and for Yemen, of course, because this report will help us, in fact, integrate the economic planning process that we want to work with together in Yemen with the climate issues. Because separating climate from economic planning is only going to lead to deterioration. I was just saying that with the current economic model of Yemen, the way resources are managed, we predict to lose about $93 billion of GDP by 2060. Additional loss, because we are losing in our GDP, and we will lose more if we continue with the current environmental management of resources. And 8.1 million additional people will join the poverty lines if we continue like this, and plus 3.8 million people will suffer from malnutrition. Additional 3.8 million people will suffer from malnutrition just as a result of the environmental degradation and the climate impact. So this report sheds the light in a scientific way on the question of human development and how it relates to climate change, and recommend some very interesting policy changes in order to address those challenges. UNDP is committed to working with Yemen. We have already an agreement that we will work on economic planning, but economic planning without environmental planning will be, as I said, a lost opportunity. So we will make sure this report becomes a living document in the planning for the future of Yemen. I'll stop here because we have I think, a presentation about the report by Zaina.
No, we have statements on the
It's up to you, Excellency. We are here. 3 minutes presentation. Okay, so let's have the presentation, and then His Excellency will address the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. I think it's important to note that hearing the adverse impacts of climate change on Yemen and Yemenis should not restrict us from exerting the efforts that could contribute to turn things around and support Yemen and Yemenis in those hard times. Going forward, we will now be watching a video with some reflections from Zaina, UNDP's resident representative in Yemen.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning. I'm very glad to be speaking to you from Yemen this morning. Yemen is responsible for less than 0.1% of global carbon emissions, but it remains as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. Over and above the massive devastation that the country has gone through over the last years due to conflict and crisis, climate change just poses an additional serious threat to the people and the environment of Yemen, and will definitely further set back progress on human development. We are already seeing changes in precipitation patterns. We are seeing record temperatures, and we're witnessing rising sea levels, as well as an increase in severe flooding that has affected people. But unfortunately, the worst is yet to come. Temperatures are expected to increase even more and negatively affecting the economy and human development. And based on our scenarios and data calibration, more flooding is predicted. And economic growth will slow down, mostly affected the poor and the vulnerable. And last but not least, health and nutrition will suffer even more than it already is. Our new report that we are launching today on the impact of climate change on human development in Yemen outlines these very dangerous effects that citizens of Yemen will face if we do not have any adaptation actions to take place. And it is not too late to make these transformative changes in order to build resilience for future crises, threats, and stresses. If we strengthen climate resilience, we can save the lives of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni men, women, and children. We will also be able to help build a brighter future for the generations to come. Our new report looks at how we can together build that resilience. It examines how we can collectively act to lift 9.5 million Yemenis out of extreme poverty and 13 million out of malnutrition by 2060. The report also helps us find solutions to saving thousands of deaths related to climate change and other related causes. As such, our new report explores the future of climate change in Yemen and identifies prospects for building resilience to those challenges. Strong and transformative actions today can protect the citizens of Yemen from the worst consequences of climate change. But we cannot do this alone, as in any other action. So we are calling for the full commitment and support of policymakers and practitioners. We're also calling on the private sector, donors and development partners, and the international community to act together. Climate change does not have boundaries. Together, we can move towards a more sustainable, secure, and prosperous future for all the people of Yemen. Please join us in this important endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Like Zena said, the worst is yet to come for Yemen, which necessitates the need for a prompt action and move from all to take adaptation actions into consideration to address the issues at hand in the future. Now it's time to delve into the findings of the report. No, would like to talk now with the Prime Minister. Thank you. Sure. Okay. It's with a great pleasure that I get to introduce His Excellency the Prime Minister of Yemen, Dr. Mu'in Abdul Malik. Dr. Mu'in, the floor is yours.
Dr. Abdullah Dardari, all guests. When we navigate through this important document, we clarify that the most dangerous thing is the climate change on Yemen. We have the issue of the conflict. You can imagine Yemen is a country depends on scarce amount of water. Collapse of Sheba Dam or in Kingdom caused the massive immigration in the early history. Yemen depends on approximately 200 dams. This is our civilizations. We are not depending on rivers. This is our Yemeni resilience. Now, we witness a floods during the last 8 years, more than 30 years ago. We remember the floods of 2008 in Hadramaut, which massive, and it took us maybe 10 years to recover from this amount. The last disbursement of compensations in this floods dispersed in 2018 when I was a prime minister, when I visited Hadramaut Valley. We cannot cope up with the latest storms and hurricanes like Luban, Shabala, Meg, Teague. Those all storms and hurricanes hit the country during the last only 8 years. Our ecosystem is fragile. We live in the mountains, coasts, and deserts, and it's a big population, approximately 30 million. The report is shocking. UNDP is a partner with us in many issues, strategize, building the strategies, building the capacity. But the most important thing, and also help us to calculate the gas emissions and different issues, but we need more help. Before this coup or this summit, we held a lot of meetings inside the cabinets to try to put a mechanism in our fragile institutions. We don't forget that we are in the middle of the a conflict that cut or shrink our economy to the half. And now with this numbers that Zena shock us about the situation, it might be in Yemen in 2060. We are not getting, it's getting worse and worse. We are already behind in most of the indications of human development indicators. And with 8 years of conflict added to this climate issues, and in my opinion, in consideration, it's more dangerous than the conflict issues. We might see a prospect of peace during a year and 2 or 3, but we need to take care of our strategies and decisions. We are now paying the price of things we didn't do in the past. Lately, we started in our renewable energy for the first time. We have gas, we have fossil fuel, we have carbonic reserves, and we can go on that path. But now we're starting. Sometimes you are on the ground level. You can build better. So we started with the solar panels, wind turbines, supported by Masdar, and the leadership of the government of UAE was very wise to support it in this direction. Other initiatives in the region we should be part of, like Green Initiative for the Middle East, launched by the Saudis. Is Yemen going to be part of this new Middle East, which is suffer from this high temperature and deserts? We don't have rainforest and other issues, but we have a fragile ecological system. We have agriculture, depending, it's one of the old civilization depending on the agriculture, but not on rivers. And we have different islands which have rare species. So we will start as a government now to adopt all these strategies so we can cope up in food and food security and the issues regarding the power and electricity. We need at least 3,000, 4,000 immediate megawatts. So at least half of this power generating should be from alternative. We are not participate of the climate change, but at least we can start right. All the issues regarding the conflict and the issues regarding that, well, we will try to take that in consideration in our strategies. With the help of UNDP as a partner, we can take an important decisions now better than later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I completely agree with you. Yemen does need support from international community to address the adverse impacts of climate change before it is too late. Now, it's time to delve into the report findings and hear from one of the principal investigators who worked on the report, Taylor Hanna, Senior Research Associate at Pardee Center for International Studies at the University of Denver. Please join me in welcoming Taylor Hanna.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, Your Excellency, for being here. It's great to see we've got overflow seating, which is really great to see. So my name is Taylor Hanna. I am the Associate Director for Development Analysis at the Fredrick S Pardee Center for International Futures, and one of the authors on the report we're going to talk about today, along with my colleagues listed here. So, as you likely already know and have certainly heard today, Yemen is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. Already, 8 years of devastating conflict have set human development back by more than 2 decades. Even prior to the conflict, Yemen was facing a dire situation as one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. Now, climate change is happening. And it's important for us as the world, as a society, to be talking about how to mitigate and slow that problem. Those conversations are happening. They're happening here at COP. But that's not the question facing Yemen, a country whose carbon emissions historically have been negligible and where humanitarian and development needs are urgent. Instead, the question for Yemen is how to build resilience to the uncertain problems that climate change poses, and what those effects on human development are likely to be. In this study, we try to do that by first trying to understand how climate change is likely to affect human development in Yemen specifically, and then we're looking at how a concerted and integrated development push can transform that future. Now, I'm going to start by summarizing work led by my climate scientist colleagues analyzing climate trends and futures in Yemen. I'm not going to go too deep into the technical details of this, but I do think it's important to just touch on. We look at 2 main data sources for precipitation and temperature rise across 5 agroecological zones There's a lot of different ways to do zoning and different analyses. We use agroecological zones in line with a recent IPRC report. We're going to look at trends historically and seasonally and project potential linear and nonlinear trends forward. And then we also, as a part of this project, compared our results with many other studies, projecting patterns at a regional level using 3 climate models and the RCP 4.5 and 7.0 scenarios. If you're familiar with those IPCC climate scenarios. So we're going to start with temperature rise. And this graph shows you the average temperature in degrees Celsius across time from 1960 out to about 2022. Now, I'm not sure if it's easy to see, the top line is the archipelago region, basically Socotra, closely followed by the coastal region. A little cooler, we have the purple line is the inland desert region. The red or orange-ish line is the highlands, and the bottom line, kind of yellowish, is the plateau region. Now, we see pretty steady increases in temperature over time, and this happens we have across different regions. Look at a map version. Again, we see this pretty steady increase in temperature, save for just a few regions on the southern coast. With this relatively linear and constant trend across regions, we do have very high degree of confidence that temperature rise will increase in Yemen and will continue. This also means that we're likely to see more heat waves, especially in the urban coastal regions, and that has serious implications for public health. Now, the temperature story is relatively simple. Precipitation is a little bit more complex. And this graph shows us precipitation, again, across those same 5 agroecological zones. And we see a much higher degree of variability historically in precipitation trends. And then, of course, you can see really recent increases. The data end in 2022 of flooding in the country. Once we look at a map view, again, we can see that really distinct regional differentiation. We see a high degree of increase in precipitation in the highlands and coastal regions. As we get further east and into the desert, we see even some drying trends. Now, we do this in the report, this analysis for each of the 5 regions. I'm just going to focus on 2 of them here. And what you're seeing is on the left, you see historical precipitation and then trends moving forward for the March, April, May season. So that's the spring rains. On the right, you see the July, August season, and that is the summer rains. And what we're looking at here is potentially a change in the seasonality of rainfall. On that left, you see overall in the spring, historically, we see a linear slight drying trend with a strong increase in recent years of flooding. So that shows us that we have a huge degree of uncertainty, much more uncertainty about the future of precipitation in Yemen than we do about temperature. On the other hand, in the summer season, we see a more steady increase, of course, amplified by recent years of flooding. Now we have the highland season. Again, we see very similar wide range of potential projections in the spring with that slight drying trend and then strong increase in recent years. And then on the right, in the summer, July, August season, we also see that same steady increase, again amplified by really recent flooding events in 2022. So now, what does this mean for human development? The next section, and again, I'm not going to bore you too much with technical details, just to give you broad background. For this section of the report, we use a model called the International Futures Model. We call it IFS for short because we often use it to ask what if questions. Now, the International Futures Model is an integrated assessment modeling platform. It's open source. It's focused on long-term trends. And it represents interactions across 12 core development systems that are displayed here for 188 countries globally. We rely on over 5,000 historical data series, and then we also pull in country-specific data when it's needed. The integrated nature of this model really is what lets us look at, say, for example, how a change in agriculture might affect the economy, affect the environment, affect health. Those economic effects, it can have further on effects on education, for example, on technology, on government effectiveness, and so on. So it's highly integrated, and that's why we use it to answer these questions. We're going to look at a total of 3 scenarios. The first of those is a counterfactual scenario, and that's what we call the no climate scenario. Basically, this is what if climate change from today on doesn't happen? And the way we do that is we turn off a lot of the forward linkages in the model. The second scenario is the climate change scenario, and this is what we really think of as the most likely current path of climate change moving forward. We take the expected base case of the model, which has a dynamically evolving development trajectory. And then we really we intervene through specific pathways that we know from literature, from research, that are likely to be the ways that climate change affects human development in Yemen specifically. So that includes through rising temperature and heat waves and increased water scarcity, we see impacts on health, labor productivity, increase in water stress, agricultural productivity, including effects on fisheries as well as livestock. And then we also have effects from flooding, which again, we expect to see a larger degree of variability in precipitation in the future, sometimes more, sometimes less. But of course, those cycles of flooding and drought can really exacerbate each other. And so from those flooding, we also include reduced food accessibility and infrastructural damage. Finally, we talk about a building resilience scenario. And that's really what we can do if we put in place a concerted and integrated push towards sustainable human development across all kinds of different areas. I'm going to talk about the specific interventions in this scenario in a little bit later, because first we're going to focus on those first 2. Again, we have this no climate counterfactual. We have the expected climate change scenario. Comparing those 2 is what allows us to sort of estimate the effects of climate change specifically. This is not the conflict. This is not the effect of, potential other growth effects. This is specifically the effect that we expect to see from climate change in Yemen. Now, this graph shows a GDP at market exchange rates in billion US dollars. We're looking at about 2017. That's when our model starts, out to 2060. And that top line is that no climate counterfactual scenario. The bottom green line is our climate change scenario. Now, we do project continued growth. This scenario does not assume that conflict gets worse. It assumes kind of a simmering, constant level of conflict. So we don't expect that climate change itself will have a drastic, acute effect on economic growth, like, for example, the start of war in 2014, 2015 had. But we do expect by 2060, climate change will lower overall GDP by 10% compared to a no climate scenario, compared to the counterfactual, which is significant. It is real. And also, when you total up all of that lost production, kind of the economic opportunity cost almost of continued climate change, we get a production cumulative loss of $93 billion. Now, that's bad for the economy as a whole. We also know that climate change affects the populations most vulnerable the worst. Now, this is the effect of climate change on poverty. We see, again, the no conflict is the blue, that's on the left. The climate change is on the right. We're looking at millions of people living on under the international extreme poverty line. of $1.90 a day in 2011 US dollars. If you're keeping up with the World Bank, this year that just changed to the 215 in 2017 US dollars. You can kind of, for this purpose, use those sort of interchangeably. So by 2060, we estimate that climate change increases the extreme poverty rate relative to that no climate scenario by 25%. And that pushes 8.1 million people into poverty who would not have been in the absence of climate change. And that's important. That there's more than 8.1 million people projected in poverty in this scenario. It's about 38. No, I'm sorry, that's the climate change. It's about 31 million people we're projecting, and an additional 8.1 million people we are expecting to be in poverty attributable to climate change. Again, we also expect to see these effects on malnutrition as we see effects on food access and also household income. By 2060, we expect that climate change increases the rate of malnutrition by more than 20% and pushes 3.8 million people into malnutrition who would not have been otherwise. Now, what can we do about that? The building resilience scenario is one that we use to really model or simulate a big package of ambitious, achievable interventions focused on improving human development and economic development across the board. Now, I'll run through some of these interventions briefly. They include improvements in crop yields and expansion of arable land used for agriculture, improvements in income distribution and caloric distribution, so increasing food access, more rapid recovery of the educational system, expanded access to safely managed water and sanitation with a targeted effort to improve access to those who are worst off, so who have the lowest level of access to those water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. We include accelerated production of renewable energy. We know this is an opportunity in Yemen. Expanded access to electricity, expansion of the road network, an increase in welfare transfers, so directed support to poor households. We also include some maybe not so directly climate change oriented interventions like improved security through a reduction in the probability and magnitude of conflict. We know that has a huge impact on the future of human development and is a really important component to any future plan for Yemen. We include increased government effectiveness as through the world governance indicators, the World Bank's governance measures, and an increase in the female labor force participation rate, bringing more women into the workforce and giving them more economic empowerment and opportunity. So what does this do? We're looking at now the same GDP graph that we looked at earlier. Now we have this top red line, and that represents the building resilience scenario. We see even from early years, it accelerates economic growth, but this really shows the long-term benefits of investments that can happen now. By 2060, we project that this building resilience scenario increases GDP by 30%. And those cumulative gains, so the increase each year added up and added up and added up, cumulative losses were about 93 billion. The cumulative gains above the current or above the climate change scenario, the expected future, total 400 billion. So 4 times the loss that we expect to get from climate change. In terms of poverty, this building resilience scenario lowers the poverty rate by 20 percentage points and pulls 15 million people out from the extreme poverty threshold. And in terms of malnutrition, it lowers the rate of malnutrition again by more than 20 percentage points, pulling 13 million people out of that malnourished state. So what can we get from all this? Climate change is what we sometimes call at the Pardee Center an uncertainty multiplier. Yemen is still in quite a precarious state and highly vulnerable to additional risks. And there's still a lot we don't know about the degree of climate change that the world will experience and endure, and about how that climate change might affect human development in Yemen. We do have a very high degree of confidence that climate change will lead to rising temperatures. And we also expect greater variability in precipitation, leading to more flooding and droughts. And these changes have serious implications for human health and development. We know climate change is likely to slow economic growth and increase both poverty and malnutrition in the long run. But there's also still time to change that trajectory. If Yemen can successfully build resilience to these challenges, it can reduce poverty and malnutrition by more than a third, while growing the economy by nearly as much. I'm going to end with a set of very broad recommendations from this work that are meant to support strategizing and prioritizing interventions. Very specific policy recommendations are out of the scope of this particular analysis. I'm not here to tell Yemen's very specific policy guidance, right? That all depends on the context in the region. That depends on the context for the specific populations. But we can take away some broad recommendations from this kind of work. One is to prioritize food security and accessibility for the poor. Yemen is and will continue to be, in even our optimistic scenarios, imports for food in the foreseeable future. And that makes it really vulnerable to changes in both its own agricultural production as a result of climate change and to global food prices, which we expect will increase as a result of climate change. And this means this is a huge priority. Two, we recommend emphasizing and investing in water security. Yemen is not running out of water because of climate change, but climate change will absolutely speed up that process. We recommend continuing efforts to reach a peaceful end to the conflict and improve security. We know that a truly resilient Yemen is a peaceful Yemen. Work we did at the Pardee Center with UNDP Yemen has already shown that conflict to date and conflict in the future will continue to have incredibly severe consequences on human development, especially if it escalates again. But we also know that improvements to security and government effectiveness could affect these outcomes across the board. We know that investing in women's empowerment is really important here. Women are already vulnerable and stand to suffer disproportionately from the effects of climate change. So protecting and directing policies to help women and girls specifically will be vital to both mitigating the effect of climate change and at the same time, economic and social empowerment of women represents a significant opportunity to build peace, resilience, and prosperity for the country as a whole. And finally, we need to call on the international community to support Yemen. This scenario, this kind of a scenario, these policies require significant financial resources in a country that's already experiencing, as we know, one of the world's worst humanitarian and development crises, while being one of the most vulnerable to climate change. At this conference at COP last year, the countries agreed to provide funding for loss and damage suffered by vulnerable countries. This and other commitments will be critical to saving lives and alleviating human suffering resulting from climate change in the future. At the same time, it will be essential to improve capacities to access and mobilize climate financing within the country. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Tawfiq, I believe, who will lead our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for this thorough presentation.
For the panel.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good.
Coming few years, and there are lots that we can address in terms of renewable energy, and making sure that we have enough policy framework that attract private sector to come in and invest in renewable energy in Yemen. There are lots of risks, financial risks, political risks, and so on, risks that face investments, those kind of investments in Yemen. And UNDP could could provide its support, technical support to analyze those risks and provide a de-risking approach for those two, so we can bring on board the private sector. In the interest of time, I'll stop there. I know you're looking at me, but the 3 minutes. But those, I think, there's kind of the priorities we can focus on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. It's much appreciated. This makes me a bit interested to zoom in more and get some focus on the water scarcity in Yemen. Water scarcity.
Meeting, so that maybe okay.
Getting back to our discussion, colleagues, I would like to get a bit more focused on the water scarcity problem in Yemen. Water scarcity is a chronic and fundamental problem in Yemen, which Yemen has been struggling with. Um, we really would like to hear some reflections from Mr. Naguib Nu'man, the Deputy Minister of the Water Sector, on the sustainable solutions to the scarcity of water in Yemen. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be with you today. Excuse me, I will speak in Arabic, then Tawfiq, he will translate. That may be easier than to speak in English. Excuse me, please. طبعا بالنسبة للعرض، العرض كان كافي وغطى تقريبا كل القضايا بما فيه قضايا المياه وقضايا الأمطار.
The presentation has covered all the aspects related to the water sector.
ولهذا أنا سأتحدث عن جزئية فقط تختص بمياه الشرب.
I'll only focus on one aspect which relates to the drinking water.
طبعا احنا الآن نبحث في آخر الحلول كما يقال، اللي هي آخر الحلول هي تحلية المياه.
We are looking at the final solutions, which is the desalination.
تم الحديث عن التغيرات المناخية وآثارها على الموارد المائية والجفاف وإلى آخره.
We have seen the impacts of climate change on the water resources management.
حقيقة نحن عندنا 3 اتجاهات رئيسية اللي هي بتمثل سياسة بالنسبة لنا في هذا الاتجاه.
We have 3 trends which we think or believe that it will be a main priority for us at the ministry.
اللي هي المياه المتجددة أو مياه الأمطار.
The surface water.
وهذا الموضوع طبعا نقوم بالتعاون UNDP.
It's okay. The rainwater, which is
متجددة اللي تتمثل في الأمطار.
water resources.
لا تتمثل في الأمطار بشكل أساسي يعني.
Yeah, and these are the main thing for us. Okay.
وعملنا خطوات في هذا الجانب مع UNDP، وخطوة كانت ممتازة، وشخصنا القضية على نحو جاد.
And we have made some progress with support from UNDP by identifying the problem and identifying the solutions that can be taken into consideration to address this issue.
هذه دراسة تخصص الوضع على اعتبار انه بالنسبة للمياه الجوفية تكاد تكون مستنزفة في اليمن.
This was carried out by UNDP, and Mr. Naguib is referring to the holistic approach to addressing water resource management in Yemen. He maintains that the study itself has identified the issues and has indicated that we only need to focus on the renewable water resources. Because the non-renewable water resources are going to be finished soon.
هو في كثير من التعقيدات، هو خيار مناسب، لكن في خيار يعني في تحديات كثيرة من ضمنها التغيرات المناخية.
There are many challenges that we expect to face. including climate change impacts or effects.
أحيانا ممكن تنشئ سد في مكان لكن قد لا تهطل الأمطار في هذه المنطقة، ممكن تهطل في مكان ثاني، وهذا ضمن مشاكل التغيرات المناخية اللي نواجهها الآن.
You might construct a dam, for example, in one specific location, while the rain comes to another location, and which is an impact of climate change, and that's an issue at hand.
هذا الخيار مهم لكنه يواجه تحديات كبيرة، ولكن علينا أن نستمر.
We are supposed to continue. I mean, we will be facing some of those challenges and also impacts of climate change.
أقرب الحلول في الظروف الحالية اللي هي مياه التحلية.
The closest solutions that we are considering is the desalination.
أصبحت كضرورة ملحة.
That become a critical to consider that option.
لو أخذنا فقط نصيب البلد من المياه في اليمن اللي هي 55 متر مكعب في السنة مع عام 2030.
The amount of water that, for example, an individual get in Yemen is 25
55 متر مكعب في السنة مع عام 2030
meter per year.
نقارن خط الفقر 1000 متر مكعب، يعني الفارق كبير جدا.
The gap or the difference is big when you compare between the poverty line.
المشروع يطرح الآن على يعني بشكل مشترك مع UNDP.
UNDP as well as the Ministry of Water Environment are considering this seriously. I mean, to consider desalination.
وبدأنا تحضير ممتاز لبايلوت بروجكت في عدن.
We have started working on a pilot program or project that will be implemented in Aden.
وحقيقة هذا الموضوع غاية في الأهمية، لأنه قضية مشكلة عدن طبعا مشكلة كبيرة.
This is very important, taking into consideration all the issues that face water in the Governorate of Aden.
الدراسة التي يتم عملها في مصادر المياه اللي تمون عدن الآن يعني تعطينا صورة سوداوية في الحقيقة.
The study that has been carried out on the water resource management in Aden, gives us a dark future or a dark present.
وهذه أتكلم عن عدن بالذات، نسميها المظلة، لأن حتى الأمطار لا تسقط فيها إلا في حالات نادرة جدا.
We are focusing on Aden because Aden suffers from so many challenges and also issues, even for example rain, which doesn't fall in Aden as well.
أيضا مناطق أخرى في تعز وفي صنعاء، هذه الثلاث العواصم طبعا هي تعاني من هذه المشكلة، لكن احنا ممكن نبدأ خطوة بخطوة.
As where we can also consider desalination. However, we can start step by step by carrying out such pilot project to see the feasibility and also the success of the project.
على الدراسة التي يتم عملها حاليا مع UNDP بالنسبة للمياه المتجددة، نعمل أيضا على حماية ما تبقى من المياه الجوفية بقدر الاستطاعة.
Considering the study that has been carried out by UNDP and relates to the challenges in water resource management, we are also working on the preservation of groundwater.
بدأنا في مشروع اللي هو يتعلق بالمعلومة، لأن المعلومة مهمة.
We have started one component or one project which relates to learning and also which is important to get and also identify the status. The data which also identifies the status of the situation within the governorate.
نعم طبعا بنا هذا النظام من جديد على اثار الحرب، طبعا كل شيء انتهى.
What we're talking about is being rebuilt again.
واعتقد لا اطول عليكم، هذه الثلاث القضايا اللي نعمل عليها الان وبالتعاون مع UNDP، وهذه خطوات ممتازه.
These are the three main priorities that we are working on with support from UNDP, and we believe that these initiatives and also projects are important.
لدينا ايضا شركاء اخرين يعملون معنا في هذا الاتجاه.
We do have partners working with us on this regard.
ونحن نوجه دعوة للجميع.
And we would like to send a call to and also ask for our partners to support us in such initiatives and projects.
وبذات المانحين، وشكرا جزيلا.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Naguib. If I may, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Abdul Saif Abdul, talking about the enhancing the human development in Yemen. I really wonder, and I would like to know more about what is your thoughts on that.
I think from my perspective, I'll start with the Yemenis, although I'm Yemeni, but now I'm speaking as an international personnel or civil servant. I think for Yemenis to stop the crisis now, okay? Because if the crisis is going and there's another crisis onset is coming, we cannot manage two crises or more than two crises. I think it's now enough for Yemenis to start resolving the crisis because without that one, it will be extremely difficult to put any plans or integrated plans that we can see results in the very coming near future. Therefore, what Muhammad has mentioned with regard to the integrated approach, I totally agree, but we require to have peace and stability. We are losing a lot of capacity, financial and non-financial, that are not being invested in the right way. The conflict is taking a lot of resources, both the capacities, the financial and non-financial, towards issues which are not for the benefit of Yemenis for the coming generation. I think for us to build a resilient scenario, as Bella has demonstrated, we need to stop the crisis now and start working together to save the future generation to be able to respond to the challenges. Over.
Thank you so much, Abdul Saif. One point which Taylor has also highlighted is that she is not here to talk about policies and things which are related to the government of Yemen. I really would like to hear more from Mr. Anwar Nu'man on that. I mean, national policies and strategies. I mean, this is just a question that we have in mind. I mean, do we have the policies and strategies in place so that, I mean, they can create the conducive environment for positive change and desired impact? I would like to give you the floor, Anwar. Please carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will try to fly over what I have been asked to say within the 2 minutes given to me. Actually, I would like just to highlight the importance of the coordination between UNDP and the government of Yemen, represented by the Ministry of Water and Environment and Environment Protection Authority. Yemen, since it's ratified the convention in 1996, it started the first step in its preparation of its initial national communication. That was the first step supported by the UNDP. And then it was followed by other activities, including a series of national communications, the second one and the third one as well, which was finalized in 2018. Other activities also in terms of identification of the priority issues for adaptation in Yemen in preparing for the national adaptation program of action that was also supported through an activity from UNDP, and the identification of Yemen's contribution in terms of the development of the intended nationally determined contribution in 2015. But all these reports previously done were actually done through support of UNDP, and then at the moment we are developing the what is going to be called the long-term low emission development strategy, which will address the mitigation side of the climate work. We have also in the pipeline other projects, and all these policy documents, I think we have already a complete foundation from these documents that tell us what are the priorities in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation. And I think now it is the time to move forward to the real implementation on the ground, to do work based on that priorities identified in the national policies. I will have to stop here because I think the time is limited. And thank you very much.
It's much appreciated. One of the most important institutions in Yemen is the Environment Protection Authority in leading and coordinating and managing the climate change activities in Yemen. We would like to hear from Abdul Wahid Arman on the technical, institutional, as well as financial gaps, if any. Over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Indeed, it's very difficult to summarize all the challenges in 1 minute, but indeed, all the challenges or the climate action is actually structured based on what they call it means of implementation, finance, technology, and capacity buildings. So to address climate change, we need to leverage and access climate finance. We need to have a technology, and we need to build our capacities to be on the right track. Currently, the amount of climate finance mobilization to Yemen compared to actual needs and what we need exactly to address the most urgent mitigation and adaptation issues is not enough, is not sufficient. So we need to have more capacity to be able to access more climate finance besides the technology and capacity buildings. Now we started building our capacities to fulfill the requirements of climate funds and to be eligible to receiving more funds. But a lot of work still needs in order to be in the right track and address the climate change needs. Because as I said, the needs are more than what we have now, and more finance mobilized is needed, more capacity building is needed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Taking note of time, I would like to give the floor for 1 minute questions, if any, from the audience here. We'll start with you.
Hello. So yeah, I have seen multiple resources and information that you have already shared. Mahal Badani. I will not call myself as an activist, but yes, I work on the resilience building in X organization here in Yemen, and I design some strategies there with the team. So our main concern is that the disaster preventions. What are we doing to what is our place in do the disaster preventions and the preparedness of us in the communities, and how can we effectively use the floods to save much more water as we are facing the scarcity of the water here in our country and in our region. We really need to have some action plans immediately. So I'm not sure what's your strategy here, and how can we elaborate together, having all the stakeholders together.
Abdul Saif, over to you.
Just quickly, I'll reply to that one. In Zena's statement, she mentioned that climate change does not have boundaries. Therefore, if you don't have affirmative steps, it's very difficult to have a DRR, disaster reduction. You might have it in different contexts at the subnational level, but that is not enough, because if you have more rains at highlands, it will go to the arid areas which you don't have access. And this is the issue. That's why in my intervention, I mentioned that we need to stop the crisis now, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult, because climate change is very volatile. It's not like people fighting to each other. It's coming from the nature, and because we people of the world, we destroy the nature by itself.
Another
Bye-bye.
question from our colleague.
Thank you very much. This is Muhammad Saeed, the Executive Director of Nahda Makers Organization, NMO, and also leading the National NGO Forum in Yemen, which established last month. Our question is UNDP taking a serious actions, including national partners or national NGOs and their strategies and plans, where they preparing for the projects and also implementation and also in monitoring and evaluation, or just it is a partnership between the UNDP and the government without including the national partners? Thank you very much.
Capacity as oversight support team, over.
I think, Mohammed, you know that we are working very closely. We now have more than 60, 70 NGOs who are working with us. The challenge is that we are working from vacuum. We don't have a national planning framework. Okay? Therefore, what we work based on the current context on the ground. We keep adapting the context, which is keeping changing, and you cannot even predict. Therefore, we cannot have a long-term partnership with NGOs or even with the ministries. Because, for example, 3 years back, there were no severe floodings, but now suddenly we have severe floodings. Okay, and we see that most of the water goes to the sea or to the empty desert, but we are not benefiting. Therefore, we did prepare a strategy on how we can optimal utilization of surface water, but it required huge investment. We have now KFW, which are working with us to try to address in one of the basin, which is Tuba and Abian, for which we can improve recharging of groundwater. I'll stop there and we can discuss later on this.
So much for wrapping up. I really would like to give the floor to Dr. Abdullah Dardari. Over to you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you. So I'm not going to address what UNDP Yemen is doing now. Abdo here is, but let me say a few words on what we need to work to do in the next few weeks and months. And that's our agreement. So first of all, we'll pick up from where Denver project has stopped. So our CGE modeler will come to you soon to build on the framework that you have here. We are building a new SAM for Yemen, and it's going to be very important to do so, building on what you have. You did not reach the detailed policies. That makes a lot of sense. When we do the macroeconomic framework that is linked to climate and human development, then we can speak about a national framework. There is no national framework in the country. Today, we don't know if we invest $1 billion here, what is the impact on the rest of the economy, on HDI, on SDGs? We don't know. And therefore, if we don't know that, we will never be able to have strategic thinking and strategic planning. So that's very important. We will build the capacity of the Yemeni ministries to do this interconnected planning and implementation and monitoring and evaluation. One level, that's one. Second, the country needs massive financing, and that financing will not come from grant funding and aid funding. ODA, Official Development Assistance, is drying up. We need to be innovative. How do we create money that goes into development priorities in Yemen? So we need to have an integrated national financing framework, an INFF, which identifies the financial flows coming in and out of the country, and then we, UNDP, can help to bridge the available resources. There's plenty of money looking for good projects if we had good projects. We need bankable projects. We need projects ready to be financed. We need some guarantees. We can help Yemen in doing so. And the third point is, as Abdo said, all of this without peace is at risk. Please think, dear colleagues, if we invest in peace, the return on investment is $900 billion, which unfortunately in cost benefit, in classical cost benefit analysis does not show. We need to keep in mind what are the economic benefits of peace and the economic benefits of climate finance and climate adaptation, mitigation, and other means. So we make the mistake always that we invest looking at the short-term return on investment, but the actual return on investment for Yemen for climate finance is $900 billion. So that's an extremely important. We are ready to help. We'll continue to help. Thank you very much. Back to you, sir.
Thank you so much. It's only meant to say thank you so much to all of you who have participated in this event. We're grateful to that, and God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.